Alright, so in this video I'm just going to talk a little bit about the steering setup I've changed from and what I'm changing to. And I'm going to use and I've got a real life example of both setups in the car. In fact, I've just got the old setup on this side of the car, and on the other side of the car I've got a finished new setup. So basically I've got a staggered setup at the moment. With the old cut and welded knuckle on this side, so this is the factory S chassis cut and welded knuckle that I used to run for since this S15 was ever built. And right here is the new acostal hub. It's a modular hub, and it has so much adjustment in it that I'm pretty excited to try it out. So starting at the beginning, right over here is the setup I've run for so long. So if you look at this hub right here, in fact we can look at this one right here from the top down, we can see that this hub itself has pretty much zero static Ackerman. We can tell that because the lower control arm, the lower control arm ball joint goes into there, and the pickup point here for the tie rod end is basically directly downwind from it, or 90 degrees to the hub. So essentially what this means is when I've been running this car, I've had no Ackerman, no static Ackerman. It's actually gives the car quite a weird dynamic curve. Now if we were to have Ackerman, this hole right here would be over here, and if we were to have I guess reverse Ackerman, this hole would be over here. At the moment it's straight, so basically what that means is with the amount the steering rack is forward in this car, which is about 45 mil, it means that when the wheel turns, when it turns this way, I would get quite a lot of Ackerman up to a certain point, and then actually it would go reverse Ackerman. What that means is the trailing wheel right here would actually turn more than what the leading wheel did. So that was the massive limitation I had with this setup, and we could have fixed that by just moving this hole across a little bit, but ultimately, you know, these are cut and welded. These are pretty much set and forget kind of setup, whereas this modular system, I know it's in pieces and it looks kind of confusing because that's kind of what I thought when I first got it, but it's actually extremely powerful. Now this modular system can do a lot of different adjustments. It can do caster trail, KPI adjustment, Ackerman, one more, scrub radius, and it all works by basically holes on the bottom, most of it anyway. So right here you've got your pickup points for where the actual hub goes into the lower control arm. So like this one right here, you've got what's the best way to show this? Side by side, I guess. Just like that. So you've got the two hubs there. On the old cut and welded hub, we only really had the one option of this is where the lower control arm shank went, or the ball joint. On this one here, we can adjust where it goes, and this gives us the caster trail, and that's going to be quite interesting on this car setup because I've been playing around with different setups in this car, running all the way up to 11 degrees caster with quite a bit of KPI adjustment taken out of here, all the way dialed back with normal KPI and like back down to 6 degrees caster, and you know, completely different feels. But 6 degrees caster with no KPI, with factory KPI in it, is really weak steering and not very safe. Doesn't feel good. So actually what we can do is we can, instead of putting caster back into it to get the feel back, with this hub over here we can use the caster trail settings. So rather than having it in this hole here, which I forget which one it is, one of these is the factory caster trail hole, I'm going to shift it to the other one. I've done it on the other side. So that's one thing, caster trail. Essentially caster trail is what Weisfab does to allow the steering to return. Also it's got an Ackerman adjustment. So in theory with the Ackerman adjustment we can actually move this lower control arm, or this lower piece on the hub. So we've got this twisting motion of Ackerman adjustment here, and that's something I never had obviously on this hub over here because it's just a single cut and welded piece of steel. So in theory if this sits next to it like that, we've got our adjustment here. We can play with that pickup point. The second thing is we can play with KPI. So KPI is this piece in here. We can actually use this piece here to adjust the shift of the actual KPI, and there's a locator in there to sort of lock, so right there, to lock the actual piece from moving. So there's 4 different settings for KPI. Now that's a little bit different to what I used to do on this setup right here. So I used to crudely adjust KPI by rotating this bolt up here, which is simply a camber bolt, and a really crude little plate welded to the shock. And essentially, by rotating this, I could adjust the KPI. See, the shock is actually, the disc caliper is actually moving based on, in fact the whole shock is moving too. Subtle differences, but it only needs to be subtle. Like 2mm change in here is noticeable in the car. So actually one combination I found quite nice in this car was about 10 degrees caster and about 4mm of KPI reduction. I don't exactly know what that is in degrees. I know that I used to move this, I used to rotate it so the center of the bolt was essentially 4mm away from where the factory shock hole is. That was quite a nice setup. But in this I don't have to worry about it so much, because instead of having to use that bolt hole that I showed you on the shock just then, I can actually just use the ability for these to slide themselves. So obviously this in here, and it allows you to have that kind of swing for the KPI adjustment, which is quite handy. I didn't touch on scrub radius, so there's also a scrub radius option here as well. So actually if you want more scrub radius, like Wisefab has a lot of scrub radius in it, and scrub radius is essentially the same as just putting a spacer onto it. If you want that, you can essentially move this in and out. So we've got the scrub radius, we've got caster trail, we've got Ackerman, we've got KPI. So that all together, that is a much more capable system than what I've got over here, which was very much limited, but it did us quite well for many years. Now if we go to the other side, I do have a setup that's already done. It hasn't been driven on, it's just been assembled. So what I've got here, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the bolts through to a hub from a 350Z, which is this hub right here. So it's a 4-bolt hub. Rather than using the S chassis as hub assembly, these are cheaper and better apparently, so they just go on nice and easy. We've got the adjustment at the back here for the Ackerman, and you can adjust this bolt up here. This is where the actual Ackerman adjustment happens. If you rip this, undo this bolt and then slightly adjust that bottom plate, we can adjust the Ackerman curve. So at the moment I've got it set to maximum Ackerman of what this bracket will do here, and these are replaceable. You can buy different ones if you want really aggressive Ackerman setups. Stewie from Acostal will give you a more aggressive setup than that. So these are customizable, but these are 4-way adjustable as they are. This is, for me, I think it looks about right, but hasn't been on the track just yet. So I run an AP Racing 4-pot caliper, which is in a GDR rotor. What I've got here is adapter plates. So the bolt holes are the same as factory. I've been able to put this adapter plate and this AP Racing caliper on to this hub. I have had to sort of grind slightly a little bit of the edge of it because it's a very tight fit. The GDR rotor is probably a little bit too small from what it should be, but it works. So I've got the brackets, the bolts that break on here for these 4-pots. And we've got the KPI adjustment and the caster trail as well, additional caster trail up top. Now let's just take a look at that. Right here what you'll see is there is essentially